So the next question becomes, why? Why would we be limited? And that goes back to the fact that we have a spiritual task to perform here on the earth. And not just one, but a multitude of spiritual tasks. So I'm just going to list some. One of our tasks is to learn to address the dualistic plane, the real life issues of life and death, right and wrong, mine, not mine, yours, not mine. To differentiate between the real life issues and the deeper truths. So to not become deceived by the momentary void, by the momentary not having, and to learn to understand that there is a having on a different plane, but if we want to have it on an earth plane, action may need to be taken. Now, the question would be, why did we invent the dualistic plane? And I say we, because we are co-creating this. We have come here to perform a spiritual task, so there is some kind of contract between all of us. And one of the reasons that we're all here is to work to bring in a higher consciousness, to grow, and to transform and purify our distortions. So the next thing I'm going to describe is what's a distortion. And this is where the two things come together, our spiritual task and the illusion, the harsh illusions of this planet, come together precisely so we can see what beliefs we hold that are narrow and not in the unitive. So rather than stay in the conceptual there, I want to work with what does this look like in real life. So when we work with the concepts of unity and duality, unity is, I want to say it's easy because it's everything, okay? And it's very hard, once again, to live with that, to live on that plane except for a few moments because we're real, we get tired, we get hungry. So when we work with duality, one of the key ways you can figure out if you're dealing with a dualistic attitude or concept is if you crank up the contrast and you can discern where one choice equals life and the other choice equals death. Now, I didn't mention this in the materials I put out, but what I found was one of the great lectures to work with unity and duality is lecture 81, which is conflicts in the world of duality. And that focuses on how key to our life is the illusion of death, death in human format. So taking that, if you take a look at something you're avoiding or something you want or a conflict or a disharmony in your life, and you crank up the contrast, you have to exaggerate a little bit, use a bit of hyperbole, and you figure out what is life. You can always assume that what you're attracted to is life. And I'll explain in a moment that that may be in distortion, but if you're attracted to it, you are perceiving it as life. And that leaves the thing you're running away from representing death. So if you take a sheet of paper or in your mind, just run up 2 columns, and you put life at the top of one column and death at the top of the other column. And you start listing things down. You can play for a bit, and you can write under life, right, and under death, wrong. And then under life, now. And under death, you can put not now. But the truth is, what we're afraid of is that not now will turn into never. And that's what I mean by cranking up the contrast. our intellect may understand, and somebody was saying this before we started, that intellectually we may be able to grasp that we can have dessert later. But there is a part of our consciousness that is a little nervous about whether if we went to the fridge later, somebody might have eaten our dessert. So not now always has the specter behind it, like some grim ghost of never. Pleasure is always life-affirming. And pain or displeasure would, of course, be death. But again, this is tricky because what we can avoid sometimes is not just pain, but a lack of pleasure. Again, what happens is from our child consciousness, we become afraid that if we don't have pleasure, and a lot of it, then what we're left with is unpleasure. But that's going to descend very quickly into awful, into pain, into not having any pleasure at all. So again, we're looking at the contrast. On the life side would be control, organizing our environment, ordering our lives. And on the death side might be chaos. Now I say might because for some people, order can be perceived as being controlled by others. So the kid, or the kid that grows into, the kid that grows up into an adult who lives in a messy house may be living in that messy home because they perceive the freedom to not put things away as life. And they may perceive a neat environment as death, as being controlled to a place where their creativity can't flourish and that they're not allowed to be who they might want to be or think they are, where they have to be defined so absolutely that they feel like that's death. So when we look at these things, and when I started, what I said was you need to look at what you're attracted to or what you have manifested and you can't seem to change. So if you have manifested a messy home, you may want to look at your concepts around order, your feelings around what that means to you. Because what you may find is, even though it doesn't sound logical and you may not be able to defend it to people or sound like you're a grown-up, a mature grown-up, because your place is always a mess. From the perspective that we're talking about here, a messy house can symbolize life, freshness, creativity, spontaneity. And a neat house can represent death. So when somebody goes towards something, what I said was you can always assume that something that you're attracted to represents life. But it is because there are distortions in there that you can become attracted to something that is actually destructive. One of the examples I use is Romeo and Juliet, because usually everybody knows the story. And the reason I use it is that if you understand the story from their perspective, what these two young people were saying is that life as presented to us is death. We'd rather take our chances. We'd rather roll the dice and go into the life beyond than live in life as our parents are dictating it to us. So they weren't trying to die. On an energetic spiritual level, they were trying to live. And that's how deeply you have to go into your own personal story and your own personal feelings when you work on this. You can't take cliche examples from society because that's an average. Average society might think that you should drive on the correct side of the road and put your things away and keep your clothes clean. But what an individual does is very unique to their particular point of view, perspective, and even their spiritual task.